firstly, thank you for joining us. This is the first of our CT Collective, which is our virtual executive series. We'd obviously love to be doing this in person with you guys, but rules dictate otherwise at this stage. My name is Tom Walley. I'm the General Manager of Corporate Traveller here in Australia. I'm based in Brisbane, in Flight Centre Travel Group's head office. For those of you who didn't know, Corporate Traveller is the corporate division of Flight Centre Travel Group, based here in Brisbane, and I'm sure you're all familiar with our company. What we're lucky enough to have this time around, and this is we're putting these on a monthly basis, pretty much, with lots of different topics, and we're lucky this time to have Warwick Lodge. Now, Warwick is Warwick. I hope I get your title right, but you are Regional Express Airlines Network Strategy and Sales Manager, which is a very big and important title. For those of you who are familiar with the airline, Rex, based out of Sydney and out of Wagga. Warwick, I think you actually live in Wagga, am I right in saying? Or
yes. That's right, Tom. Speaking to you today from Wagga.
From Wagga, which is great, on the right side of the border to keep him out of COVID territory, so that's good. And look, we're lucky to have Warwick on board. Those of you who have read the media over the last 6 months will know that Rex, like most airlines around the world and certainly here in Australia, suffered pretty badly in March when this COVID pandemic hit and were grounded. And the topic of today is pivot to thrive. So Rex have actually got a really great story around what they've done with their airline and what they're about to do even more in the new year. So I thought it'd be a great opportunity for us to hear a bit about the thought process behind, being on the brink of probably, like any of us in the travel industry, have stared down the barrel of survival at its very best over the last 6 months. Rex is no different, I'm sure, at the point where all the aircraft were grounded and no one was in the air. Probably a lot of tough decisions that had to be made and appear to be coming out of this really well. So, Warwick, I thought what we might do is maybe briefly just a brief background of yourself and then just a bit of history of Rex and how it came about.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tom. And just from the outset, thanks very much for the opportunity to speak to people about, I guess, something that we're quite passionate about. My background, I started back in Kendall Airlines back in 1991, employed by Don Kendall and worked for Kendall right up until the Ansett collapse. Held the position of Manager of Network Planning for Kendall and then worked for the Ansett Administrator for just under 12 months. Began working with Rex in 2002 and have been with Rex since its inception, some 18 years ago. I guess the establishment of Rex was always probably something that should have been done even pre the Ansett collapse in terms of the synergies between the Kendall Airlines business and the Hazelton business. And we're very proud of our heritage. We had two predecessor airlines, which were effectively family businesses. One ran by Max and Laurel Hazelton, based out of a little place called Cudell near Orange in New South Wales. And the other was Kendall Airlines, which was owned and operated by Don and Eilish Kendall. So we've got a long and established history, some sort of 70 years of combined history in aviation. And we've, I guess, steadily grown our regional business since 2002. I became involved in the Rex Management Committee in 2005, which is in line with when we listed on the ASX. And I've been on the Rex Management Committee ever since. We've had some fairly big expansion over the years. Our traditional network, we've operated out of Sydney, Melbourne and Adelaide, largely operating regional intrastate services. And we had a fairly significant expansion throughout Queensland in 2015. We started flying to Queensland or intrastate in Queensland back in 2010. But in 2015, we undertook a number of Queensland regulated routes, which overnight on the 1st of January 2015 added 24 Queensland airports to our network. So we currently operate to 27 airports in Queensland. And slightly more recently, in 2016, we spread our wings to open up operations in Western Australia. We commenced servicing licensed or regulated routes for the West Australian government between Perth Albany and Perth Esperance. And in 2018, we extended that north of Perth to operate services up to Carnarvon and Monkey Mia. So pre-COVID, we were servicing 60 destinations in total, with operations out of Perth, Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Cairns and Townsville. We operated around 75,000 flights with our Saab 340 aircraft each year. We carry around 1.4 million regional passengers across our network. And I think, as Tom has sort of pointed out, everything sort of came grinding to a halt midway through March. We had a series of back-to-back board meetings trying to understand what the whole thing was going to mean for us as a business. And we were, like everyone, seriously looking down the barrel of there was a real chance that we'd have to park the entire fleet and effectively stop services. One of the big things that I guess was really important for Rex was that we've always been a very financially disciplined organisation, and we went into COVID owning outright our 60 aircraft, owning all of our buildings, not having any debt, which sort of positioned us well to be able to effectively mothball the airline if we had to. But on the 28th of March, the Commonwealth Government stepped up and announced a funding program for regional aviation, the Regional Airline Network Support Program, and also the Regional Airline Funding Assistance Program. And there were 12 regional airlines throughout Australia which benefited from that. And that effectively provided funding for regional airlines to provide a minimum essential service so that we could continue to provide connectivity between regional centres and the capital cities, which, whilst the numbers were small, in many cases it was actually more critical to provide these essential services during COVID than ever before. In particular, we were travelling and carrying medical passengers, doctors. We were carrying supplies between regional centres and the capital cities. So yes, we're very thankful of the support that the Commonwealth Government provided to maintain essential regional services. And we worked hard together with the Commonwealth Government and also various state governments to gradually build the services over the last 6 months. And I guess whilst all those balls were in the air, we effectively sat down as a company and had to look at where we were and effectively examine what other opportunities there are out there for us to navigate our way through, I guess, this changed operating dynamic. And I guess a lot of this was steered by our board, but I guess we've always had a view that we felt that the Australian domestic market, there was more room than just having the two main players in the market, obviously with the Qantas Group and Virgin. And I guess with a whole range of dynamics changing, we'd gone from effectively an environment where for the past 10 years we've been struggling to find pilots to an environment where we've got pilots everywhere looking for work. We've got availability that's came available at airports. We've got lower lease rates on aircraft, and we've effectively got like a really strong foundation as a business, both financially, but also with all of our expertise. So the board effectively made the decision to look at starting domestic operations on the triangle, so operating between Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane and Melbourne, Brisbane. So it's certainly been a rollercoaster ride the past 6 months. One of those sort of times which, very similar to the Ansett collapse. Once we came out of the Ansett collapse, here we were with, Virgin operating from Terminal 2 at Sydney, which was historically like Ansett. And you're in one of those sort of modes where we're operating so normally for so long, and then all of a sudden the whole world's changed. And then you look back and you go, if I can rewind the clock 12 months, I would just never imagine that all these things could have changed in such a short space of time. And I guess we all find ourselves in one of those moments again.
So it's a good story, Warwick. So can I rewind you back to March, obviously pre-government funding, which was probably in memory, it happened reasonably quickly. Actually, it was sort of there was probably a 2-week period there. how close did you guys come to, revenues? I think you were telling me the other day, revenues were down at about 2%, so down 98% on previous. We can relate to that. How close did you come to packing up your bags and going home? Because it would have been a pretty long road back.
We had 5 board meetings in the space of 10 days, and we were really sort of grappling to understand the situation. And I think no one, when it was first starting to flow through, no one really understood what was coming around the corner. And I think I mentioned this to you the other day, but one of my first pieces of advice to the board, which was in the very first board meeting when this was all starting to happen, was that I felt that the impact to regional was going to be less than anywhere else, because, obviously regional travel was a little bit sheltered from what was going on around the world. And I can still remember sort of saying that I thought the impact would be somewhere in the vicinity of 10% to 15% down. I think, over the course of the next 10 days and probably very soon after that, it was probably only 48 hours after I made those comments, everyone was becoming a lot more appreciative of what we were dealing with. If it hadn't have been for the government funding being announced on the 28th of March by the federal government, I think within a week of that, we would have been effectively grounded and closing the doors. So that's how close it come. And in some ways, it was actually a lot more difficult than, if I can sort of compare it to going through the ANZAC collapse. Obviously, with administrators being appointed, even with that process, whilst there's a lot of turmoil involved, there's quite a bit of structure around that process where you kind of feel like you're part of that process and you're sort of pulled along with it a little bit. Where with this, it all just happened so quickly that, parking the airline, which could have been anywhere from a 2-month thing to a 6-month thing to a 12-month thing, was really quite daunting. So, I guess like the management of Flight Centre and corporate traveller, like you're trying to deal with the situation, but, everyone's all ultimately concerned about the future of the business and I guess everyone's own individual future as well, which made it extremely difficult.
Yeah, look, I can relate to the pace. I remember submitting my board report in very late February, maybe even the 2nd of March, saying that I thought the maximum impact that this would have on us would be to lose airfares to flights to Asia, which might impact us by about 6%. So delusion is probably a word that springs to mind when I look back with hindsight. It goes into March. You get into a bunch of board meetings, 5 in 2 days or 10 in 5 days or whatever the number was, and somehow the Commonwealth government comes to the party, and you can see that, okay, maybe we can survive a bit. Can you remember how the decision or the idea came about? We're talking about pivot to thrive here. You're talking about diving into probably what is one of the tightest held duopolies in the airline industry globally, in Australia. High barriers to entry, very, very aggressive competitors, particularly the national carrier, who's been here for a long, long time and has a very good market share. Can you remember where the idea came about and how that kind of thought process came to fruit, where you went, okay, do you know what, let's take it on in the busiest route in the world, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, against 2 of the most aggressive carriers? Who was the crazy one who said that's a good idea and agreed to it?
Well, it's effectively come from Rex's executive chairman, and the board is where the discussions started. And they very quickly sort of brought the broader Rex Management Committee, which I'm a part of, into that discussion. The first 8 to 10 weeks was 150% focused on our regional business, and under the RANS program, there were some certain guidelines that said that we could operate between 2 and 3 return services per week across all of our existing network. So we had to effectively go from operating 1,500 flights a week to 60 destinations to almost just start with a fresh sheet of paper. And for example, in Sydney, we used to operate 18 flying aircraft, 20 aircraft in total. And our first flying schedule under the RANS program had 2 aircraft flying. So we only had 2 lines of flying instead of the typical 18 lines of flying. And we were trying to obviously maximise how we were flying in the most efficient way possible to make sure that, we were not drawing too much money in terms of the RANS funding. So we needed to do that as efficiently and as effectively as possible. So when the idea to start domestic first flowed through to the management committee, it was probably, to be very transparent, something that was quite daunting in the environment that we were working in, that we were effectively going from an environment that we thought that we may have to park the entire fleet and mothball the whole airline, to then rallying to redesign our whole network to fit the new RANS guidelines under the Commonwealth, to be now discussing what do we think about commencing domestic operations. I guess once we digested that and considered all the, I guess, variables that were attached to it, it made a lot of sense to us. You know, we're experienced operators. We have been always very focused on our operational performance and our reliability and our OTP. We've got a vast network in terms of being able to create that connectivity from our existing regional network to the domestic network. And at the end of the day, COVID has just created a unique opportunity that would have never have come about without it. It would have been so difficult to get into the domestic market. And obviously, prior to March, whilst we'd had discussions about the whole Australian domestic aviation market and there being room for a third player, and having our views on, I guess, the duopoly in the way that, you know, understanding the financial position of both Qantas and Virgin pre-COVID, that probably gave us a long-standing understanding of the domestic aviation market, where, you know, whilst we haven't been in that market, we've been operating in the regional market and watching everything extremely closely for the past 18 years. So when everything sort of lined up, it really felt like the right thing to do. We understand that it brings with it a significant amount of commercial risk. But from our side, we think that it's a very measured risk. And our view is that, you know, we're planning for the startup to be quite self-funded. We're very comfortable with our modelling, and particularly like with our low cost base. So that's effectively how it sort of transitioned. And really throughout this last 4 months since July, we've stood up a project team, particularly for domestic. We're working through moving to a high capacity air operator certificate, and we're due for that to be that process to be completed by early December. So everything's progressing really well behind the scenes. And probably just one other thing to say is that, you know, people have often asked, have you done this with the anticipation that perhaps back in May and June that you didn't think that Virgin were going to continue? We've never really sort of thought about that in terms of, that hasn't been sort of part of our thinking. We actually think that there's room for a third player, either with or without that sort of speculation happening in the Virgin space. So, you know, I guess we might be simplifying it a little bit, but we're planning to focus on our on-time performance and our reliability, planning on focusing on frequency, and keeping things very affordable with our low cost base, which we've become, I guess, renowned for as a regional operator.
Okay, that's great. So let's talk a little bit then about this new product that you're bringing to market. Certainly there'll be plenty of the guys on the call here who will be interested in what it means for their future domestic travel when we have all these borders open. So key routes you've mentioned, obviously Melbourne, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Sydney, Brisbane, I'm assuming. And then let's talk a little bit about points of difference, where you see yourself positioning, either price-wise or service-wise, some of the key features and benefits you got there.
Yeah, so we're looking to start services on the 1st of March, and we hope to go on sale around mid-December. And we'll be looking to start with around 9 return flights on the Melbourne-Sydney route. And after that, we'll be looking at between April and June, bringing, I guess, the other routes as part of the triangle online. I guess during 2021, our focus will be on the triangle and any, I guess, of the shorter routes that are linked with the triangle. So we're not looking at like expanding out effectively into any long haul destinations initially, but we may look at other shorter routes in and out of either Melbourne, Sydney or Brisbane that sort of work with our broader operation on the triangle. I think that we could get up to, depending on the support that we receive, even around 12 return frequencies on the Melbourne to Sydney route, over the first 6 months after we start up. In terms of our product, we've already started doing some work with simplifying, streamlining our fare structure. We've already got a very, I guess, embedded, long established fare structure in place, and we're doing some work with that to streamline the fare structure into fewer fare categories, looking at injecting some more flexibility into the fare rules within those categories. And I guess where we look to be positioned is that we'll be very affordably priced when it comes to, I guess, the traditional comparisons with Virgin and Qantas. Obviously, we don't fully know where Virgin are going with their model, but we've also catered for, I think we'll cover off the Jetstar price points as well, where we may be slightly above the Jetstar fare offerings, but our plan is to be less focused on the ancillary revenue, meaning that we are looking to include checked baggage, the cabin baggage, as well as effectively advanced seat preference, obviously with some inclusions changing throughout the different sort of fare categories. The in-flight service, we're looking at providing, complimentary catering in terms of snacks and tea, coffee, water, all included across the different fare types. So it is very much a full service offering, and I guess combined with the reliability and the frequency, I guess, and our pricing, we are also looking to have a Rex Lounge product. We've already got a Rex Lounge in Sydney and Melbourne, also in Adelaide. Our Sydney and Melbourne lounges, we're actually looking at either expanding or moving to a new location where we don't have the ability to expand. And all this will be up and running by the time we actually launch services in March. And then we've got Brisbane, where we're looking to open up a Rex Lounge where we've never had a Rex Lounge previously. So our lounge offering is really all about providing a good workspace for business customers, workstations, Wi-Fi, etc. And we're very proud of our lounge product. We get lots of good positive feedback from our existing regional customers, and it will be a little bit of the same in terms of the product offering, but in some areas we need to, I guess, increase the size, and which may involve either increasing the size of our current lounges or in some locations moving to a new space.
Okay, and that's it. That all sounds great. And I know I think I read recently you're bringing on about 6 new 737s or 6 737s as part of the fleet to do the routes. And things like loyalty schemes, I know at the moment you have Rex Business Flyer. I assume that will just continue, and you're not going to have an alliance with anyone. It'll be you guys running that scheme yourself. Is that right?
That's right. We've already established arrangements for the first 6 aircraft, and the first aircraft will actually be coming into the system in the next 10 days. So that's a pretty exciting milestone for us. In regards to what was the next part of your question, Tom?
The frequent flyer.
Yes. I guess we have in the past had our Rex Business Flyer product, and we're currently sort of reviewing that at the moment in terms of looking at our sort of broader product offering, where we're going to sort of start with effectively no loyalty, like no full loyalty program, but that's something that we will consider particularly as we bed down our startup services and we then start to establish like a big enough passenger pool to make that make sense. But we are currently having a bit of a look at what we can do with our current business flyer program in terms of how we can either utilize that or adapt that for our domestic operations.
Okay.
It does have some benefits in terms of providing loyalty benefits back to the actual business as opposed to individual travellers. And the feedback that we've got, particularly from our regional customers, is that that's sort of worked well to provide that, I guess, cost benefit back to the actual company that's paying for the ticket.
It's actually a good point of difference, I think. And guys, I should say, if you've got any questions at all for Warwick, just you can throw them in the chat. If you don't know where chat is, just down the bottom of the screen, just hover and you'll see chat pop up, and you can just put them in there. And then Caro, who you can probably see on your screen there, she can facilitate that. So we'll come to those at the end, if that's all right. But Warwick, if I could just pick up on that, I think that's a great idea with the scheme coming back to the business. So the guys on this call, as you know, Corporate Traveller is a business focused on the SME travel spend or the startup to mid-market business. So typically, most of our customers are spending. They're not large multinationals spending millions and millions of dollars on travel. They tend to be companies who travel, who have a good size spend on travel, but a lot of them are SME customers. I know the SME customer is really important to you guys. We have a lot of regional customers. What sort of things in terms of corporate deals or whatever, have you looked at that? Any offerings for these guys on Rex?
We have. I guess at the moment, we see ourselves as being quite adaptive to the needs of the corporate customer. So we don't have any sort of hard and fast rules in terms of spend or thresholds. And I think initially we'll be working like quite one-on-one with corporate accounts to see how we can tailor like a volume-based arrangement that works well for both parties. Obviously, initially we're going to have services on the triangle routes, and it'll take us a little while to provide, I guess, a greater network offering. But I think, most of the SMEs and corporate customers that are conscious on ticket pricing where that's sort of quite meaningful, I think that sometimes that broader network offering isn't necessarily as important as getting the best possible deal on Sydney-Melbourne or Melbourne-Brisbane or Sydney-Brisbane. So, we hope that, our plan over time is to grow our network and provide that more extensive network offering. And we're already getting a lot of good feedback from, a lot of our existing corporate customers that have been traveling with us regionally. They're excited about the ability to be able to connect regionally with domestic and tailor those sort of corporate offerings to cover both our regional operation and domestic operation, which we want to handle quite seamlessly. The other thing that you sort of touched on, which I didn't answer, is in regards to affiliations or alliances with other airlines. We've had a lot of approaches in the past couple of months since we've announced operating services on the domestic, and our plan is to let those, I guess, grow organically as it makes sense to enter into those alliances. Obviously, with the international borders being closed, we've got a little bit of time up our sleeve to establish some of those alliances with international carriers, but we are already in some discussions with some New Zealand-related operators and carriers in regards to, that they're keen to look at what they can do to extend their offering onto a domestic network. So we are keen to sort of expand our, I guess, alliances and working with other airline partners, but we'll let that organically grow as the business grows.
Okay, great. Well, that New Zealand affiliated narrows it down. Now, tell me, I don't know how many people on this call have actually been on a plane in the last 6 months. I was lucky enough to go on one about 2 months ago, but most haven't. You've obviously been operating an airline through this period. Maybe just give us a little insight into travelling at the current moment, and in terms of what Rex is doing with COVID safety as travel starts to return a bit more at pace, particularly between, say, Melbourne and Sydney. Yeah,
well, we've had, the obvious enhanced aircraft and airport cleaning provisions in place since March, and we think that, we've been we've been really quite proactive in regards to the other measures that we've put into place. And I guess this stems back to when we first launched our minimum essential services throughout regional Australia with the government support. We very quickly implemented the wearing of masks on our aircraft. So we mandated the wearing of masks right across our whole network. And we also implemented temperature testing at check-in. So we think that we've, led the way when it comes to, I guess, the COVID safe provisions within the airline industry. And we've had, other regional airlines follow suit on the back of what we've done. We had to go through that sort of strange environment whereby, mandating the wearing of masks and implementing the temperature check-in was sort of an awkward process to go through, from where we, received, in some cases, a little bit of negative feedback at the start, but then that sort of changed very quickly to a lot of positive feedback. And one, we've got an obligation to provide protection for our staff. We've got an obligation to provide protection to the regional communities that we fly to, which have been largely COVID-free throughout this pandemic. And we'll continue with that approach. We'll obviously have to watch things closely as we draw closer to our domestic startup, but we don't have any hesitation in terms of continuing the current, COVID safe arrangements that we've implemented even onto our new domestic services.
Yeah, okay, great. All right, well, look, I'm going to end it up there, and I'll end it just by saying how excited I am as someone who works in industry and who's in corporate traveller, that there is another player coming in domestic space. It's really great, and I think if nothing else, it's a really great story that you've turned what was an incredibly negative moment in Australian aviation history into what could be a really positive outcome for you guys. So I'm really looking forward to your planes being in the air on 1 March. Hope to get on one myself. I've got to get to Sydney first, get over the Queensland border, which is the hard part. I know I'm just looking in the chat, there's no other questions in there, but Amy's just saying to me, look, if you have any questions after the fact, or you want to reach out and find out a bit more about Rex, just get in touch with one of our CT guys, and we will help you with that. I'm sure Warwick would happily tell you more about Rex and its future. So it's a pretty exciting time in Australia. It's great to see you, mate. So thank you so much for your time. And if there are no other questions, we'll finish it up there. Thanks everyone for your time. Really appreciate you joining.
Thanks very much, Tom, and thanks again for the opportunity. And just as a closing statement, if anyone would like to, channel any feedback through to us, we take on that feedback willingly. We want to have a good product out there, particularly for the corporate and SME customers. So if you've got any things that you'd like us to look at or think that are good ideas moving forward, we're more than happy to take them on board.
Great. A flexible domestic carrier. We like that.
Thanks very much,
right,
Tom, and thanks
everyone
for
for
listening.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
See you. Bye.